The courtroom was a crucible of tension, its air heavy with the weight of unspoken verdicts. A bailiff's voice cut through the silence, sharp and unyielding. "Ma'am, remove your coat before approaching the bench." Every head swiveled toward the woman standing alone in the center of the polished oak chamber. Clara Hensley, in her late 30s, stood with a quiet defiance, her navy wool coat buttoned to her chin, her shoulders squared against the scrutiny. Her auburn hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her hazel eyes held steady, unblinking. Without a word, she unfastened the coat and let it fall from her shoulders. The room caught its breath. There, on her right forearm, was a small tattoo. A crescent moon cradling a medic's cross, no bigger than $50. The judge's gaze fixed on it, his stern face softening, his pen stilled above the docket. He knew that mark, and what it meant. Clara wasn't just the defendant in a minor tenancy dispute, accused of illegally housing a runaway teen. To the courtroom, she was a soft-spoken bookstore owner, a woman who fostered troubled kids in her small clapboard home on the edge of Willow Creek. But long before this day, Clara had walked a different path. A decade earlier, she'd stood under a merciless sun in a dusty Syrian village, her combat boots sinking into scorched earth, her arms cradling a wounded child as gunfire echoed in the distance. 2 tours as a field medic in conflict zones had left her with medals pinned to her chest, shrapnel scars across her ribs, and a tattoo inked in memory of a comrade who died in her embrace. That crescent and cross weren't just art, they were a vow. No one gets left behind, no matter the risk, no matter the rules. Back home, Clara hadn't settled for a quiet life. Her home, a weathered 2-story with ivy climbing its walls, was a sanctuary for stray cats, faded photos of soldiers she'd served with, and foster kids the system had all but abandoned. One of them, 16-year-old Jaden, arrived at her doorstep with haunted eyes and a backpack full of secrets. His bruises spoke of a past he wouldn't name. Clara didn't press. She just set a plate of warm food in front of him and asked if he liked to read. When the authorities came, demanding Jaden's return to a foster system that had failed him, Clara didn't flinch. She stood in her doorway, her voice low but firm, and when the summons arrived, she faced it with the same resolve she'd carried through war zones. Now, in the courtroom, her sleeve pushed back, the tattoo gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a quiet testament to her past. The judge, a grizzled man named Harlan Voss, known for his iron rulings, sat motionless. Whispers faded into a hush. That tattoo, it wasn't just a coincidence. Years ago, in a smoke-choked valley, Harlan had seen a medic with that same mark, dragging a wounded officer to safety under a hail of bullets. The memory hit him like a fist. His throat tightened, and he shifted in his seat, the weight of recognition settling in his chest. The courtroom's silence stretched, taut as a wire. Clara stood unwavering, her tattooed forearm bare under the harsh glare of overhead lights. The crescent moon and medic's cross seemed to pulse with a story no one else could read. The crowd, a mix of curious onlookers and stern officials, leaned forward, sensing something unspoken in the air. The bailiff, a broad-shouldered man with a permanent scowl, shifted uncomfortably, his earlier command to remove her coat now hanging like a misstep. Judge Harlan Voss, his weathered hands gripping the bench, finally broke the stillness. His voice, usually a blade of authority, wavered. "This court," he began, his eyes flickering to Clara's tattoo before darting away, "has reviewed the charges." He paused, the weight of his next words pressing against his chest. Clara's life had never been about seeking attention. After her tours, she'd returned to Willow Creek not as a hero, but as a woman determined to rebuild. Her bookstore, a cramped haven of worn shelves and coffee-stained tables, doubled as a refuge for kids like Jaden. She'd seen too many left behind, on battlefields, in broken systems, to turn away from a boy who needed her. When the police arrived, citing violations for sheltering a minor without clearance, Clara hadn't argued. She'd simply packed a small bag, slipped on her navy coat, and walked into the courthouse with the same steady gait that had carried her through chaos overseas. Now, standing before the judge, she didn't plead or explain. She let her silence, and that tattoo, speak for her. Harlan's mind churned. He remembered that medic in the desert, her silhouette against a burning sky, fearless as she knelt beside a soldier bleeding out. The crescent and cross had caught his eye then, a fleeting detail in the chaos. Could this be her? The woman now standing before him, accused of defying protocol to protect a kid. He cleared his throat, forcing his voice to steady. The defendant, he said, his gaze sweeping the room but avoiding Clara's. Acted outside regulation, but not outside morality. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the crowd. A few veterans in the back, their faces etched with years of service, nodded almost imperceptibly. A woman in a faded shawl clutched her purse tighter, her eyes glistening. Clara's expression didn't change. She stood as she always had, resolute, unyielding, her hazel eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the courtroom walls. The charge against her was simple, harboring a runaway. But the truth was messier. Jaden had fled a foster home where neglect was a language he knew too well. Clara hadn't just given him a bed. She'd given him a chance to breathe, to feel human. And when the law came knocking, she'd faced it head-on, knowing the cost, but refusing to bend. Now, as the judge's words hung in the air, she sensed the shift in the room. Not pity, but something closer to reverence. Judge Harlan Voss leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped tightly, the gavel untouched beside him. The courtroom's hush was almost tangible, a collective holding of breath. His eyes, sharp and gray, finally met Clara's, and for a moment, the weight of their shared past hung between them, a desert, a war, a moment of impossible courage. Some follow rules, he said, his voice low, almost confessional. Others follow a higher call. The words seemed to catch in his throat, as if he were speaking to the medic he'd seen years ago, not just the woman before him. This court finds no fault in your intent, Ms. Hensley. All charges are dismissed. A murmur swept through the room, soft at first, then swelling into a quiet roar of disbelief and awe. You're free to go. Clara didn't flinch, didn't smile. Her face remained a mask of quiet resolve, but her fingers brushed the tattoo on her forearm, a reflex, as if grounding herself in its promise. The crescent moon and medic's cross had seen her through blood-soaked fields and now through this wood-paneled battleground. She bent to retrieve her navy coat, draping it over her arm with deliberate care, and turned toward the exit. The crowd parted, their eyes following her, not with judgment now, but with something unspoken, something sacred. An older man in a worn veteran's cap stood, his hand snapping to a salute. Others followed, some standing, some simply nodding, their faces etched with respect. Even the bailiff, his earlier sharpness dulled, looked down at his boots, a flush creeping up his neck. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the courthouse steps in gold. Jaden waited there, his lanky frame hunched, his dark eyes scanning the doors. When Clara emerged, his shoulders slumped in relief, tears brimming but unshed. She stopped beside him, her hand resting lightly on his back. No one gets left behind, she said, her voice steady, carrying the weight of a vow kept. Jaden nodded, unable to speak, his fingers clutching the strap of his backpack. The wind stirred, lifting Clara's sleeve just enough to reveal the tattoo again. A quiet emblem of battles fought and won, not with weapons, but with unwavering will. The moment felt like a painting, frozen in time. Clara. her auburn hair catching the light, standing beside a boy who'd found safety in her shadow. The courthouse loomed behind them, its stone facade cold and unyielding, but they walked forward into the warmth of the fading day. Clara didn't need applause or vindication. She'd never fought for recognition. Her courage was the kind that didn't shout. It stood, unbowed, for those who couldn't stand alone. Clara and Jaden descended the courthouse steps, their shadows stretching long across the cracked stone. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves from the trees lining Willow Creek's quiet streets. Clara's navy coat swayed lightly in her hand, her tattoo now hidden beneath her sleeve, but its presence lingered like an echo. Jaden walked close, his sneakers scuffing the pavement, his silence louder than words. He didn't need to say thank you. His presence beside her was enough. Clara glanced at him, her hazel eyes softening for the first time that day. "Hungry?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm, like a tether pulling him back to safety. He nodded, a small smile breaking through the weight he carried. Back at her bookstore, the bell above the door chimed as they entered. The space was warm, cluttered with stacks of second-hand novels and the faint hum of a kettle in the back. A tabby cat curled on a windowsill, basking in the last rays of sunlight. Clara's home wasn't just a building. It was a promise, a place where broken things found repair. She'd built it from nothing, pouring her savings into this haven after the war, filling it with foster kids, stray animals, and memories of those she couldn't save. Jaden settled at a small table, pulling a worn paperback from his bag, while Clara moved to the kitchen, the clink of plates a quiet rhythm against the day's tension. The tattoo on her forearm wasn't just a mark of her past. It was a compass for her present. In Syria, it had been a reminder to keep going, to carry the wounded through chaos. Here, in Willow Creek, it guided her to kids like Jaden, to lives the world overlooked. She'd faced the courtroom not for herself, but for him, for the vow she'd made long ago under a different sky. The dismissal of charges wasn't a victory to celebrate. It was a door left open, a chance to keep fighting for those who needed her most. As night fell, the bookstore glowed softly, a beacon in the quiet town. Clara stood at the counter, her hand steady as she poured tea, her gaze distant but resolute. She didn't need the world's approval. Her courage wasn't loud or flashy. It was in the meals she cooked, the beds she made, the lives she refused to let slip through the cracks. And as Jaden turned a page, safe in her orbit, the crescent and cross on her arm remained a silent vow. No one gets left behind. Not in war, not in peace, not ever.